we as a church are in a warfare. You as a Christian individually are in a warfare, and we as a church are in a constant warfare. You're aware of that, right? What scriptures make us aware of those realities? Anything that comes to your mind? What does Ephesians 6 say? So we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Who's Paul speaking to in Ephesians?
Church.
The church.
Talking to the church. Those who were once dead in their sins and have been made alive, right? That is speaking of a corporate, but really focusing on the individual fighting, right? How do you fight? What are some of the ways that we're told to fight in Ephesians chapter 6? Pray at all times in the Spirit with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints. He's saying constantly be praying in the Spirit. What's another weapon? The Word, which is the Spirit, right? It's your sword, the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. You see a valiant warrior in one of these movies that you guys watch, and you don't see him with like a toothpick. You see him with this massive sword just breaking stuff down, just destroying his enemies. That's the sword of the Spirit. It cuts through the enemy forces and advances. What else do we have? What other weapons?
Well, we have the whole armor in Ephesians 6, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation.
The breastplate of righteousness. What do you think the breastplate of righteousness is for the Christian? What is a breastplate, and what is the breastplate of righteousness?
Well, it covers the heart. Righteousness covers the heart, is having a right heart with God and living in holiness.
You know, there's some really interesting aspects to the breastplate of righteousness. Debbie said it's having a right heart, it's living in holiness, having a heart right with God. What are the flaming darts of the slanderer? What's the devil do? What does he do to people? He deceives. When you say, the flaming darts of the evil one are attacking me, what are you typically talking about? What kind of stuff is happening to you? Discouragement. I often think of the lies and the slander and the accusations of Satan, right? You're so pathetic. You're this, you're that. He's lying to you and he's accusing you, seeking to kill you and destroy you. And so you put on a breastplate. Well, a breastplate protects against attacks. So a flaming dart comes and it hits a bronze breastplate. What does it do? Does the breastplate catch fire? No. Does it pierce you? No. It just falls through. It falls down. Because you've got the breastplate. The breastplate of what? Of righteousness. Whose righteousness is that? Christ first. It's the righteousness of Christ, where he says, I'm going to bring a charge against you. And you say, who can bring any charge against me? God has justified me in Christ Jesus my Lord. Hit me with what, Satan? But it's also, I believe, holding the faith with a clear conscience. If you really want to fight against the flaming darts of the evil one, walk in purity. Strive for holiness, Christian, right? The holiness without which no man will see the Lord. The holiness with which for which you beat your body and make it your slave so that you'll be holy. So Satan can't come to you and say, you scumbag, look at what you did. Because you didn't do it, right? You're striving for holiness. That's not the breastplate of righteousness in its entirety. It's the righteousness of Christ. Whether you sin today, yesterday, tomorrow, you're washed in the blood of Christ. So those attacks, no charge can be brought against you. But it also has the element, I believe, of living a pure life, walking in holiness, sanctified, being sanctified as you hold the faith with a clear conscience. Okay, these are some of our weapons of a warfare because you, Christian, are constantly in a warfare. What's another text where you could think perhaps more corporately about us being under attack? What makes you think that we as a church are under incessant demonic attack? What text can you think of? Any?
Where it says in 2 Timothy, I think, that anyone who desires or does live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted.
Okay. Absolutely. You desire to live a godly life? Again, that's promising persecution, we may focus that on the individual, certainly applies to the church. I'm thinking of one text. Turn to Matthew chapter 16. There's one text which speaks about us as a church, which promises us something, that we will be in a warfare literally until kingdom come. Until consummate glory, you and I will be in a warfare incessantly. Matthew chapter 16, look at verse 15. People are saying, Jesus asks his disciples, who do people say that Son of Man is? Someone says he's Elijah, John the Baptist raised from the dead. Verse 15, Jesus said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. This is not one-dimensional. I've heard a lot of people say, and it's good, but gates stand still, right? And the church is assaulting hell's gates and Satan's gates. And Satan's gates will not be able to hold up against the assaults of the church. True, right? We're to be ambassadors. We fight against not against flesh and blood. We're to be on the offensive. But there is the reality here, and it might be a greater reality here. I think some people would go back and forth. But that what this is saying is, as the church is standing strong and hell's gates are assaulting it, and demons are flying, and arrows are shot, and Satan is seeking to undermine and work and destroy and blow up Christ's church, it will not prevail. You will be hit and hit and hit, and you will not be smothered. It will stand, no matter what assaults come up against it. If you look through church history, you see a church which has stood, and who are the soldiers standing? 7-year-old boys, 12-year-old little girls in coliseums, 85-year-old men. This is the church standing, and all of hell's gates are assaulting it. The nation, or the powerful Roman army, or what's the city of Rome? What word am I looking for? The kingdom of Rome. What do you call that? Empire, the Roman Empire, assaulting little girls and little boys. And what happens to Rome? It crumbles. What happens to Christianity? It stands firm. Satan will not prevail against the church. But guess what that means for you and me today? We are in warfare. We are in a warfare with demonic forces. Demonic forces which are powerful. Demonic forces which, if you look around this world, there are a lot of stubborn people in this world, right? Have you ever talked to somebody who you've been trying to convince them of something, and they are so stubborn, and you literally cannot get what you're thinking into their head? You cannot get on the same page, and you feel like this is impossible because that person is so stubborn. Have you? Maybe they're sitting next to you. So you felt that, right? This world is stubborn, and people are sharp, and they have intellects, and they're set in their ways. And if God removed a common grace amongst this world, every single one of them would be deceived by devils. All of them. Do you realize that? Satan is powerful. And you say, how do you know that? Because that's your whole Old Testament. There was one little people group which light shone from heaven onto them. Little Israel. Little Israel. Have you ever looked on a map at Israel? Little Israel. The rest of the world, granted not as many people populating it as now, but the rest of the world, totally deceived. Total darkness. Which is why when God sent Israel to enact his judgment, he said, man, woman, child, slaughter them all. They're all wicked. Just slaughter them. Just everywhere you go, slaughter them. They're wicked. Totally deceived. Because Satan had free reign over this earth. It was pitch black. So those people that are so stubborn in their ways follow a devil like this. Follow Satan like this. That's what Ephesians 2 says. following the course of the world, which is following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit now at work in the sons of disobedience. Demonic forces are powerful, and they are up against you and us every single day. Do you feel it? Do you feel that warfare? Our church right now, I believe, is under attack. A peculiar attack. Not just the consistent everyday attack, but it's the church is looking to be undermined by these demonic forces. Our unity as a body is under attack. The church, the desire of the church, our desire for one another is to be what John said when he saw the elect lady in 2 John. He says, you walk in the truth and you love one another. You're united and you love one another because of the truth. Oh, what joy fills my heart as I look at you. You are loving one another. That love for one another, the unity of the body, is under assault by Satan and hell's gates. And it will be constantly. We're told in John chapter 10 that Satan has one purpose in the church: to steal, kill, and destroy. He wants to destroy us. He wants you dead. He wants your soul dead. He wants this church disintegrated. You realize every time the gospel goes forth from here, Satan hates it. And if he could end it in a moment, he would. Revelation chapter 12. Let's get a reality of this. Look at Revelation chapter 12. You can turn there or listen. Revelation chapter 12, the last few verses. The dragon became furious with the woman, went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. Who are the offspring of the woman? On those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. That's who Satan is seeking to destroy. Do you hold to the testimony of Jesus? I do. I proclaim it, and so do you. Satan is after you. He's after us. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Listen to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Can anybody quote it off the top of your head? Maybe when you hear it, you will be able to. Be sober-minded. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Christian, Church of Laredo, be sober and be watchful. Why? Satan is seeking to devour us. That is Satan's goal. He will creep in himself. He will send people to come in as his agents, and they will not look like devils walking in. Marilyn Manson will not walk in those doors. He will send people to disrupt, to steal, to kill. He wants to destroy us. You're aware of this reality, right? Theologically, we're aware of this reality, right? But practically, are we as aware of this reality perhaps as we need to? You realize that when you come to church on Sunday, you come to be fed. Today, you come to be fed. You come to be encouraged. You come to be served. You come to worship God and come into His presence. But when you come to church on Sunday, because there is an enemy seeking to destroy you and to destroy me, you are going to be tempted with certain things. You will. You are going to be tempted to bite, devour, and harm one another. You will be tempted to think bitter thoughts, malicious thoughts, angry thoughts. You can count on it when you come to church. Disunity will be tempting you and knocking on your heart's door and trying to get in. And if you let it in, very subtly, unknowingly, but Satan is seeking to destroy the unity of this church, and he's going to seek to do it through one of us, through each other, through our own communion or our own fellowship and community. Satan is seeking to destroy. And I think I say we're in a peculiar season because of some of the things that I've seen pastorally. This is not to any one of you. This is to all of us. I have seen some amongst us, more than one of us, having dreams, very vivid dreams, very demonic dreams, dreams that have been directed against one another, dreams that have been targeted at attacking our own holiness. We're getting assaulted in the night. I see that amongst us. Some are being attacked with temptation viciously. What is temptation? You think it's just about you, don't you? You think when temptation comes, this is just a struggle with you in your own quiet recesses of your own room. No, temptation attacks the body. We're going to look at 1 Corinthians 5. The purity of the church is contingent upon holy members. So when you give in to temptation, it is not just affecting you, it is affecting everyone. Because now you're not walking in purity and holiness, and a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Satan is seeking to destroy us by attacking you with temptation. Some of us are being attacked with depression and oppression and hopelessness. It's Satan. Bad memories flooding our minds night and day of things that have happened to us or things we've done. Satan is throwing them in our face. Some are being attacked or undermined with bitterness and quarreling about other people in this church. If Satan can get you biting one another and devouring one another, it doesn't produce love and unity. It produces cliques and groups, right? And we break off and we're disbanded. So when you come and you think this bitter thought towards that person or this envious thought or malicious thought about them is just you inside you, realize there's a greater enemy at work who very well is throwing, now some of it's your flesh, but he's throwing temptations and he's giving you food and he's trying to feed bitterness amongst one another. Some of us are listening to slander from outside about town, but even from inside about one another. Things said about us, and we listen to it. Some of us are listening to gossip. Somebody comes to you and gossips to you, and instead of exhorting them about gossip, we listen to the gossip, and we receive the gossip. Some of us feel this sense of disunity and division tangibly. You can almost feel it at times. Brothers and sisters, we ought not to think this is strange when it comes. Peter said, don't think it's strange when the fiery trial comes upon you to test you. But we must not think it's strange, but we must not overlook it. We must recognize it in our midst. When you walked in today and you felt bitterness towards that sister or that brother, don't think it's strange, but don't brush it off. Satan is seeking if he can use you or any means to undermine and disunify this body, because he hates this body. He hates this church. He abhors it with everything in him. Why? We're going to see in the second hour. You know who we are? The church is comprised of those who've been snatched out of Satan's kingdom, brought into the marvelous light of God, and told, you go back into that darkness and proclaim my excellencies. And so here we are in the middle of Satan's kingdom's courts, proclaiming the excellencies of the one he hates, and he abhors it and wants to destroy it. Satan is assaulting us as a church. We ought not to think it strange when it comes. We ought to recognize it. And I want to see, quite practically, how will we see this expressed in our own hearts? Okay, so theologically, we're under assault. We can even feel it at times and go, what is this? Why do I feel this disunity amongst the brethren? We can often feel it in our own hearts. A very practical example. I've not gone much, but when I go to the mission field, I know it's a season when I know if Satan's going to destroy our purpose here, he's going to do it through disunity. So the times I've gone on the mission field, I've expressly prayed and focused and made it a daily prayer, unity, unity. Love covers, covers, covers. Because you know that Satan's going to try to destroy the team so that nothing gets done. Imagine a team of 7 people who go to the Philippines on a disaster relief 2 weeks after a horrific storm to spread the gospel, to bring water, food, and shelter. Imagine if those 7 people can't get along. Is anything going to happen? Nothing. Satan has his way. So those 7 people better make sure they get along, right? Well, we know Satan's going to attack that unity, so we're focused. Unity, 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 unity. So if somebody says something I don't like, I go, love covers it. Good. Unity. Love covers that. Unity. You're focused on it. You're set on it. But that's kind of easy to do in a little 2, 3, 4 week period, right? Because it's so right in front of you. But church, we're in this for the long haul, for years, but it's the exact same thing. Here's this little church in Laredo. And we're trying to go into the disaster relief of the spiritual condition of this city. If we can't get along amongst one another, nothing happens. And the disaster goes on. Do you see that? We've got to have a very vivid forefront of our mind understanding of what's taking place, and we've got to fight weekly, daily, hourly for unity. Some of the practical ways that we see this expressed in our own heart. Feel free to share if you have anything. These are some of the things I see. That this disunity and Satan seeking to undermine this church will practically come out. Disagreement about internal issues. There's a lot of things that need to take place, right? There's a lot of activities this church does. There's a lot of times we come together and we've got to organize things. Disunity about internal issues, little or big. Yesterday, Michael and I worked on getting the live stream working. Well, there's bound to be conflict there. This wire here, that wire there. We do this or we don't do that. That's a very little thing. But Satan will start there, making you two disagree and building bitterness up. And this didn't happen, but we could say Michael didn't like the color of the duct tape back there. And I could build this bitterness about him because he never agrees with what I want to do. And it grows, right? Disagreements about internal church issues. Issues with the building. A lot of issues can come up with this building, right? Brothers and sisters, we need to recognize we have a building. We have a building. Louisiana, multiple churches have no building. Travaris Tut, Jacksonville, no building. They just said, nope, can't meet here anymore. They're in somebody's house. We're crashing the De Leons today. We're crashing the Aguitas today. No building. We have a building, multi-roomed, AC'd, seats, kitchen, 2 toilets. We have but disagreements about the building. It is tight. We understand that. So problems come. So when those problems come, they can be very obnoxious, annoying problems because they have to do with cry rooms and babies and all this stuff. And these are real issues, but we've got to understand at the heart, we've been so blessed. How can we work this out without undermining our unity as a body? But that's a practical way that this can be expressed, the disunity amongst us when building issues come up. Think about this. Thirdly, character conflicts. I don't like how she does that. I don't like how he talks to visitors. I don't like how she cooks. I don't like how she tells me what to do. I don't like how she doesn't tell me what to do. I don't like how she's so bold in her character. I don't like how he's so passive in his character. Character conflicts. They're constantly going to come up until kingdom comes. Will we allow this to to divide us? You will see it practically expressed in how you respond to character conflicts. Is there anything else you can practically think of? Perhaps I don't want to open it up to any personal issues because we're not getting personal. Where this isn't a time. This is not a town hall meeting to stand up and accuse Susie and Tommy of things you've been trying to get off your chest. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But anything at the forefront of your mind of issues that can cause division or problems that could rise? Turn to James chapter 4. What we're going to look at today is not specific issues, but how do you deal with issues so as to preserve unity amongst us, and why do you deal with issues so as to preserve unity amongst us, okay? How and why. Maybe we could do why and how. Let's do that. Let's do why and how. Why do we deal with issues, and then how do we deal with them? But look at James chapter 4. Brothers and sisters, this was written to a church. I don't know where James is. There it is. This was written to a church. Christians. Now, granted, some amongst them were not saved, as in a lot of churches. But do you remember the time we went through James chapter 3, verses, 16 and on? 13 through the end of the chapter. Do you remember that last summer? We did about 3 or 4 messages on wisdom. What is wisdom? And you know why I did it? Does anybody remember why we did that series? We did that series in James because I expressly said we are in a time of great unity as a church. And it's going to come under attack. So let's see what we're to do to not allow it to destroy us. James chapter 3, 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not wisdom that comes down from above. Now look, remember our warfare, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. Demons are at play here. This is no little deal. This is spiritual warfare. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial, and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Brothers and sisters, if there's any sense of division among us, if there's any sense of bitterness or anger or frustration among us, you know what's sowing it? Wisdom that is demonic. Not wisdom from above. And you say, well, how can you say that? Because wisdom from above is peaceful and it sows peace and righteousness. And it sows unity. It's a crop that comes up just full of love and unity amongst one another. That's wisdom from above. So if we're feeling the opposite, if we're tangibly looking at issues which are the opposite of unity, it's because demonic wisdom's involved. It bites, it's bitter, and it divides. Okay? Then he says this in chapter 4. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose it is no purpose that the Scripture says he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell within us? A little bit of issue there with the Greek. Won't go into that. But he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Now I want you to notice what he's just said. What's causing quarrels and fights among you? Brothers and sisters, if there are quarrels and fights among you, whether visibly or whether you have quarrels with the other person or fights with the other person, and they're staying here and you're just telling your group of people, or you're complaining to your husband or your wife. But what causes this jealousy, this fighting, this bitterness? Flesh. It's just your flesh. It's not wisdom from above. It's because you have bitter jealousy, selfish ambition. You're seeking your own good and not the good of others. That's what causes it. But notice what he's about to say. You say, yeah, it's flesh. Yeah, you're right, it is flesh. So how do we fight it? Watch how we fight it. Chapter 4, verse 7. Submit yourselves to God. Humble yourself to the Lord. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. What? Why are you bringing the devil in here? We're talking about flesh. He says resist Satan. Why? Because Satan's at the root of it. Satan's the one driving it. Satan's the one throwing the thoughts. Satan's the one trying to undermine this work. Do you see that? So he says, in fighting your flesh, resist the devil. Get the devil out of here. Have wisdom from above. Do you see wisdom that is demonic? Satan's in here. It's a fight against the devil, brothers and sisters. Let's read on. Draw near to God, he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Now look at this. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? You know what he's saying in a nutshell? When you judge your neighbor, you are becoming the lawgiver. And you're saying, you're not cutting it. You're not doing what you need to be doing. You're not fulfilling the law according to me. And he says, who do you think you are? There is one lawgiver, and it's not you. Don't judge your neighbor. Leave your neighbor alone. You walk with the Lord. Do you see that? Now, James 4 is a powerful text. It's a powerful chapter, and it's a very harsh one. It's not needed for, I'm not coming to you with James 4 because I'm saying, you adulterous people. My point in coming with James 4, though, is to show what is undermining bitterness, quarrels, fights, dissensions, disunity amongst us. What is it? It's satanic. It's wisdom that's demonic. It's Satan having his way with you. I said at the start, when you come to church, you should fully expect to have bitterness, anger, frustration knocking at your door about other people. Expect it. But when you give into it, you're giving in to the satanic undermining of the unity of this body. Do you see that? Any thoughts on that so far?
Jerry,
Yes, sir.
I had a thought from 1 Peter 5 when he says, hold on, let me go there. That same verse where he says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. The next verse says, resist him, firm in your faith.
Yes.
Knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. But then I wanted to focus on this. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be the dominion forever and ever. Amen. So I know in my memory that truly does happen. I mean, the demonic attacks toward a brother or sister can be heavy, but as soon as you fight through them, and I know I haven't always, I've given in, but there's been victory too, and when there is, there's just like,
Yes.
it really does confirm and strengthen.
You will find in your own practical dealings, I've walked with some of you through some of these issues, and issues come to me. And so what we're about to go through, I've commended to you. Go to that brother or sister, deal with it. And you know what the fruit has been from that dealing on several occasions? Greater love and unity. Saying, wow, I love that person so much. But you just had a problem with them. But you went to them. You dealt with it. You saw how they responded. And unity and a bond was built stronger. It happens amongst us. What Esteban's saying, what he's pointing out here from Peter, is righteousness will be sown, and peace and joy and love will be established in your heart. Okay, I've spent probably more time than perhaps I should on the warning, but brothers and sisters, know this. Satan is seeking to destroy us. And it's going to be evident, not with you picking up a pitchfork and running to church, but with you having a bitter thought about him or her, or disagreeing and being tempted to malign or to speak gossip or slander about someone else. That's how he's going to do it, okay? So why do we care about unity in the church to begin with? Here's why. Go to Hebrews. I didn't write down the text because I hopefully will be able to find it. Hebrews chapter, it's either 4 or 2, rebuke one another, exhort one another. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 13. Thanks, brother. I had 13:3 in my mind, and then I got confused. Why do we care about unity? Why do we care when we see a brother or sister that we have something against, an issue that we don't agree with? Why do we care to do anything about it with them? You know what? Actually, let's flip this. Let's actually go to the how we're to do something about it. Sorry, it won't mess up your mind. But we have an issue with a brother or sister. That's how disunity is going to come in, right? Unity has to be doing with walking in bonds of peace, accord together, going the same direction, same pace, same place, right? Disunity is when two people have conflict, internal conflict, this group with that group. They set up, first of all, groups are formed and then they're broken apart. That's disunity. So how do we keep unity? Well, this is how. Instead of Hebrews, we'll go there in a minute. Turn to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew 18. And we're going to see something very basic, but something monumental in the life of this church. Matthew 18, verse 15. If your brother sins against you, that's where it begins. Guess what? We're going to sin, and we're going to sin against one another. Somebody might sin. A visitor might walk in today, and one of your brothers and sisters here might approach that visitor and sin against that visitor. They might. They didn't sin against you, but they might sin against that visitor. And you see their sin. You see it out in the and it enrages you, and you start to feel bitterness against them, and you start to have something against them. How are you to deal with this? If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. If he refuses to listen even to the church, let him beat you as a Gentile and a tax collector. He says, go to your brother. The way you deal with sin, most of the issues within this church are going to be sin against one another that you see, or somebody sins against the church and you see it. A sin with the visitor would be a sin against the body, a misrepresentation of the body. So you see that sin. What are you to do? You are not to run to the pastor. You're not to go home to your husband or to your wife and say, can you believe it? He did it again, and she did it again. And that's not what you're supposed to do. You're not to go about town. You're not to go and try to form a group. What are you to do when that person sins? What does he say? How? Alone. In private. You pull them aside and you confront them about their sin. You are commanded to do this. This is not an option. This is not if you feel up to it. You are given a command. Christian, you are commanded to be sexually pure. It's a command, right? Christian, you are commanded to love the Lord your God. Do you have an option in it? Is there any option? Christian, you are commanded, if your brother sins, between you and him alone, you deal with that sin. You don't have an option as a Christian. You go to them. You know what this means? Now, this is big. Some of you in your mind right now might be thinking about somebody else's sin in this church that they've done against you or you against them. You might right now or at any time have wondered, well, they're the one who's supposed to come to me. What's my role in this? Am I the initiator or the reactor? Guess what? If you know of sin against you or your sin against them, the ball is always in your court. Always. You realize that? Always. If there is an issue of sin in the body between you and a brother or sister, the ball of reconciliation is in your court. This is a tennis analogy, right? You can never say, their turn to hit back. Their turn to approach me. I didn't do the sin, they did it. Never. If your brother sins, you go to them. And if you've sinned against them, you go to them. Do you realize? We're commanded, if we sin against one another, ask forgiveness, right? You're commanded to deal with it. But this isn't talking about your sin, it's talking about their sin. If they sinned, you don't wait for them to come to you, you go to them. It's always in your court for reconciliation. Do you see that? Any questions or thoughts on that? I know we're running out of time here, so I want to get to the why. Why do we lovingly go to one another with issues, with concerns, and speak to one another? Why? The why is going to shape also the how we do it, but here's why. Go to Hebrews. Go to Hebrews chapter 3, verse 13. Look at this. Brothers and sisters, overarching this, well, I'll say in a second. Hebrews 3:13, verse 12 start. Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. What did he just talk about? He just talked about Israel hardening their hearts and they're in hell. Israel is in hell. We're going to talk about the church in the second hour. The majority of people who are given that little light in the darkness I spoke of earlier are in hell because they rejected it. And he says, brothers, don't go to hell. Don't let there be an unbelieving heart in you and be damned. And then watch this. But exhort one another every day, as long as it's called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. This is a one another duty. It's a command. It's a Matthew 18 command. Go, exhort one another. How often? How many times, Jesus, if my brother sins against me? How often do we go? What does he say here? How often? Every day. Which means there's going to be sin in our midst, right? Maybe even every day. Maybe every time you come to meet with this church, somebody's going to sin against you. Can you believe it? I can. Exhort one another daily. Why? Who cares? It's so much easier to let Tom be over there and be a jerk to everybody else and me not say anything because it's so uncomfortable. When I go to him, I have to talk to him and I have to get out of my comfort zone. I have to pull him aside and I'm nervous. I don't know what to say. I don't want to do that. Just let him be there. Let him sit there. Let him simmer in his sin and go to hell. You realize that? Let him fall away. Who cares? I don't want to get uncomfortable. I don't want to bring sin to him. She was over there gossiping, and I saw it, and she gossiped to me and was tearing down that person over there and destroying them, but I don't want to deal with that. So let her be a gossip. Let him be a slanderer. Let him be stuck in his immorality. Let him be in his pride. I'm not going to touch it. Let him go to hell, but I don't want to be uncomfortable. Do you see that? He's saying, get out of your comfort and go to them. Why? So they don't burn in hell, so they don't fall away from the faith, so that sin doesn't creep in. Think of it like a callus. You think of a growing callus. If somebody has a growing callus of rock and stone on their foot, and they're lugging around this rock on their foot, and it's growing, and you see it, but they don't see it. They're just walking around. And they've got this thing on their foot, and you're like, dude, you don't see your limp? He's like, what limp? And you're like, oh, okay. You're supposed to go to them and say, brother, you have a limp. This sin is clinging on to you. But if you don't, you know what happens? It grows up into the leg. Now they're dragging a leg around. And then this thing grows up. And it's hardening them. And pretty much they become stone. And they're not living. And they're damned. And you went, whoa, the guy's stone now, okay? What love is that? You see gangrene on someone's pinky? Go to him and let him amputate it before it covers his arm and he loses his arm, before it gets to his heart and he dies. That's the picture. Sin is hardening. They don't see it. They're blind. They don't feel the pangs of their conscience against it. You are to be the pang of their conscience against sin. Go to them and lovingly tell them so that they don't go to hell. Do you see that? Why? Because you love your brothers and sisters. Secondly, because you love the church. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5. If you love the purity of the church, you're going to go to one another in sin. Verse 6, somebody's actually been allowed to live in sin. He's got the wooden or the rock covering his leg and he's dragging it around and nobody's saying anything. And he says, your boasting, Corinthians, is bad. Why? Verse 6, do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse the leaven from among you. If somebody's living in sin, if there's an issue there in that person's heart, don't only for the sake of their soul go to them, go for the sake of the church. Think again of this rock and it's growing. Do you have that picture? I have a weird picture in my head, but do you guys get it? There's this rock and it's growing, it's hardening. But now every single person that he rubs up his leg against, a little piece falls off and it starts to grow on them and harden them. Do you see that? It's like when somebody has fleas from Bella, like one of the kids gets fleas, you stay away from that kid, right? Until Debbie cleans their head or their parents clean their head. You say, I'm not going, sorry buddy, I love you, not going near you because I don't want your fleas. Let's get rid of the fleas. But guess what sin is like? When you allow the fleas to stay on the little child's head and you say, whoa, okay, I'm going to avoid. But then nobody else knows and you don't tell anybody else. You don't care if anybody else gets, and then the whole place is infected by sin. That's what he's saying. If you love your brothers and sisters, exhort them. If you love the church, exhort them. If there is one of you speaking lies or having bitter thoughts, and those are being expressed, it will spread like wildfire through the church. It will spread like leaven through the church. If you love the purity of the church, then lovingly address sin when you see it. Do you see that? because the person who's sinning probably is deceived by it and doesn't see it themselves. This is the law of Christ, isn't it? It's just love. Are we thinking in the realm of love when we show up to church? Let's just love one another. Wow, I see them hardened by that sin. I'm going to lovingly exhort them because I love their soul and I love this church. Or do we go home and complain about it and then tell somebody else about it and then let them complain to someone else and then we just look at that person different? That's wisdom from below. Wisdom from above is peaceable, pure, gentle, loving one another. Does that make sense? The way we're going to stay unified in this church is when, not if, when issues arise, little or small, you deal with it in this way. Does that make sense? You go to them, loving them, and you bring your concern. Whether it's a personality issue, whether it's a building issue, whether it's we can't decide what in the world to do and we're just butting heads about cooking on Sunday, whatever it is, you deal with it lovingly, pulling that person aside, showing them their sin. If they say, get out of here, you're crazy, lovingly bring someone else or a couple and show them, and you deal with it that way. Does that make sense, church? There's a lot more we could talk. Wow, it's late. I've gone way over. Any thoughts or questions or anything? Let us be a people that is obeying the commands biblically of how we deal with internal conflicts in our midst for the love of each other, for the love of the purity of the church, for the glory of God. Amen? All right.